there's such vast research that has been done, but I feel like we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more that needs to be conducted. And we can break those into a number of larger categories. For example, there is still work that I think should be done around verifying or, evidential type studies that are focused on, that are more proof oriented. And of course, we have the wonderful mediumship, triple blind, rigorously designed studies that have been conducted at Windbridge, and our own Arnaud Delorme has done a number of those studies, and others around the world have modeled that same study design to look at verifying the information that mediums can receive. So I think that's one area that is still important to move forward. And yet, personally, I get more excited about more process-oriented research. What's happening with the mediums? What is the experience like? What is the information that's actually being received? How can we qualitatively assess that in some way? Another fascinating area for me is also around the characteristics of the mediums themselves. Is there anything that's particular about them that allows them to be more successful at mediumship than others? Now, I personally believe, and I think there's evidence that's growing to support this, is that we all have the capacity to these intuitive, noetic channeling abilities in a general, the general type of ESP, psychic channeling, whatever you want to call it, and that the way that that shows up for each of us is quite unique. And so I imagine if you took 100 mediums and you were able to assess them in some way for their skill and their ease, that there would be a bit of variation. And so where does that variation come from? Is it something that's genetic? Because we've all heard that these type of abilities can run in families. So that's a research question that we're exploring at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS. Is there something about their personality? Do they need to be more open? So we talk about the personality trait of openness and extroversion that may be related, or some other type of characteristic. There's also people who believe that training can support mediums to be able to improve. And, we see this in other types of abilities like remote viewing and precognition and psychokinesis, that if you actually train someone, that they'll get better. But these are various aspects that I'm really excited about researching. And then another area that I kind of alluded to is just around content. There's so much content, not just about discarnate beings, but just other, information about humanity, about how to improve ourselves, technological, scientific, you name it. There has been information brought through with channeling and trance mediumship. And now that we have AI, could we use those type of methods to do more sophisticated qualitative analyses on this vast amount of information and find various themes? So I could keep going, but I think those are kind of large buckets, theme areas, if you will, for research that would be wonderful to do going forward.
Excellent.
I think it depends who you speak to. So you likely know about the recent Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies essay contest that asked for the most compelling research on survival. So it was a wonderful opportunity to have the top minds in the field collate all the evidence that we have generated over the past 150 plus years. And so it's wonderful to have those essays as summaries. And the criteria for that was to show beyond a reasonable doubt that the evidence for the survival hypotheses. Now, Robert Bigelow and the Bigelow team felt that that was clearly demonstrated, that survival was shown beyond a reasonable doubt. As a scientist with my scientist hat on, it's challenging for me to say that definitively because of the psi, living agent psi, super psi, potential alternative explanation. With my personal hat as a spiritualist raised person and my personal worldview, I personally feel that it has been shown beyond a reasonable doubt, because if I look at all the evidence from the various areas like reincarnation studies, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, the very rigorously done mediumship experience studies, and then the terminal lucidity cases are just incredible. So when you look at those all together, the survival hypothesis is the simplest explanation in my mind. And my personal experiences have supported my personal belief in that. And yet with my scientist hat on, I can't say that it's been definitively proven with our scientific tools. So again, I think it depends who you speak to. Yes. Well, you see how I just tried to navigate it when I say, well, I put my scientist hat on, it's this. I put my personal hat on, it's this. And I feel grateful that I can at least do that. And some might argue, well, you're not really a scientist because you're so biased by your personal views. And yet all scientists are biased by their personal views. And I can still design a rigorous study and, create it in a way that it attempts to reduce bias. It has sufficient controls. I, don't put negative findings in my file drawer. I will, present and publish negative findings. I'm, as best I can not be attached to the outcome. And yet, as we're learning more and more, the scientist worldview influences the work that we do. And that's true for anybody. It's not just specific to me. So my intention is to be as transparent as possible and to neither believe nor disbelieve, to be as neutral and transparent as possible so that people know where I'm coming from and that we can just examine the work as it unfolds in an unbiased way.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm all for collaboration. It's a value that I hold dear and try to nurture and support. And I wholeheartedly agree that getting feedback and having multiple voices be part of the design process is very, very important. And how we navigate that, I think, is the trickiest, because sometimes you can end up with a situation where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, and it's a matter of supporting each other to understand where we're coming from. So just to give you a simple example, we had a mediumship study where we invited mediums to look at a picture of a deceased person and then decide how they passed. Was it a shooting or a car accident or heart attack? And they saw, I don't know, I think it was like 200 faces. And the feedback was, I would never, ever do anything like this in my normal mediumship practice. This is not a normal way of doing it. And does that influence my results? Because I'm being asked to, within, 10 seconds, make this decision. And then the question arises, well, where are they getting that information? Are they just tapping into, a psychic reservoir to get that? Or can they really connect to a discarnate personality in those 10 seconds to produce a result? So, when I first came to IONS, this study design was already at play. And I talked to the investigator and said, so you do realize this isn't how it's normally done, and you have to talk about that in the paper because it's taking mediumship so out of context. And yet it is answering a research question of, can it be done? But it needs to be separated from the way that normal mediumship is done. And so, back to your question, it's how do we find yes, I think the voices are important. And yet, how do we find the balance of those voices to create rigorously designed, controlled studies that also honor the needs of the process? And that's the rub, because it's challenging to do both. It's a great question. I don't know what it's going to take. I think that, we're moving right now in the West, we're entrenched in this materialist paradigm. And being entrenched in that, it's very difficult for people to believe that there could be something more than our brain, that our consciousness is not just limited to our brain. But I think that that's shifting, and it's shifting more and more quickly to a post-materialist paradigm that holds that our consciousness is not limited to our brain. And by extension, when our brain dies, that our consciousness continues. And so there's work in physics, quantum physics, cosmology. I think when the research from various other fields contribute in a way to demonstrate that our consciousness is non-local, that it will be that much easier to promote, I don't want to say promote, but to hold this survival hypothesis as more probable. I mean, it's interesting because, you look at spiritual traditions around the world, and they do teach it to children, and they do, hold those beliefs. And yet in the West, I think that materialist push divorced us from that spiritual nature of ourselves. I do feel it's shifting. I mean, when I first started, after I got my clinical degree, I was in private practice, and then I got into research. I was doing meditation research, actually, and this was in 2008, so not that long ago. And I was just pushing against a brick wall. Like, people, I was at an academic university, and they just they weren't even willing to look at meditation. It was so taboo, like literally so taboo. It took me, I think it was 4 years, to teach a mindfulness-based stress reduction class in the Department of Neurology. This was crazy. Now, mindfulness is everywhere. It's on the cover of Time. Everyone meditates. Fortune 500 companies meditate in their boardrooms. So I've seen this huge shift in terms of meditation. And now we're seeing a psychedelic renaissance. Psychedelics were so completely taboo. You couldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. And now everybody wants to do psychedelic research. There's all this funding coming out about it. You even can look at UFOs and, the whole UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, which has now been disclosed as real and people are studying, etc. So I feel like humanity in the West is getting much more primed to bust open into this field in a major way. I think that the BICS Institute, the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies, is a great supporter of that work financially and otherwise, which is going to support researchers to do more research around it, which I think will support that effort as well. So long-winded way of saying, I think times really are changing. And I look forward to connecting with you, Chris, in 5-10 years and saying something like, do you remember when we did that video? And look at how much things have changed in that time.